And let's do our blessing together. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu asher kitshanu b'divanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord of God, rule of the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And with that, here we go. Jesse, would you read our first text, please?
Sure. At the turn of the year, the season when kings go out to battle, David sent Yoav with his officers and all Israel with him, and they devastated Ammon and besieged Rabbah. David remained in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, David rose from his couch and strolled on the roof of the royal palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And the king sent someone to make inquiries about the woman. He reported, "She is Batsheva, daughter of Eliam, and wife of Uriah, the Hittite." David sent messengers to fetch her. She came to him and he lay with her. She had just purified herself after her period, and she went back home. The woman conceived, and she sent word to David, "I am pregnant."
All right, thank you. Can you read our context, please?
Sure. This is from the biblical book of 2 Samuel, which talks about the reign of King David.
And our first question.
Choices are not preordained. At what points could this story have been changed?
All right, thank you. So, here's the beginning of our story. Where could it have gone differently so far?
If she didn't go, she didn't have to go there.
All right.
More importantly, David shouldn't have solicited a married woman. I wouldn't put the blame on her. I'd say David made the first.
I didn't blame her. I just said that.
No, I know, but I understand, Norm. I'm sorry, but I should have put it that the first, for me, the first thing is that David should not have solicited a married woman.
That's what they did in those days.
I heard an interpretation several years ago that David had a habit of walking on the roof in the evening. She knew it, and she went out and made it purposely so that he would pay attention to her and invite her over.
Yeah, we studied that in Rabbi Glick's class also about his walking on the rooftop.
So there's another piece. If you scroll back up again, if you start at the beginning, and I didn't make this up, this is something from the Michael Hatton class that I put in the chat. David, for the first time in the history that we've studied about him, if you look at the rest of the book of Samuel, does not go out with the military. So he's cozy at home, so cozy, in fact, that he's taking an afternoon nap while his soldiers are out fighting and risking their lives. And not only is he taking a nap in the afternoon, but he has a leisurely twilight stroll. And at least this interpretation is that when the king sends for you, there is not an option to say no. We could think about Esther and Ahasuerus. She didn't have any option to stay out of the harem. So I don't think we have reason to blame her. And we should question David. What is he doing having this life when every previous battle he's been with the military?
Okay.
It's a question of leadership, talking about it that way.
Could be.
I coincide with you. At that time, I was going to mention clearly a command from the king was not to be disobeyed.
All right, let's go on to our next question. How might Batsheva have felt at various points in this story so far?
I think that towards I don't know. I think maybe she might have at least when David sent messengers to her, perhaps she felt somewhat obligated to
Mhm.
present herself to David, due to a similar thing that someone else had mentioned with not being able to refuse the king an audience, or at least possibly a social stigma on doing that. So yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I was thinking.
She might also have been flattered that she was
She
chosen.
might have thought that he was calling her to tell her that something terrible had happened to her husband.
Right.
Hmm.
I mean, we have no reason to know what the messenger meant to her because, as usual, the text isn't all that interested in women's feelings.
Mhm.
David, I'm interested in the verb fetch. David sent messengers to fetch her, which doesn't sound like you're given a choice.
Yeah.
Is that the meaning of the verb in Hebrew, that the verb implies that there was no choice, that she was fetched to come, not asked to come?
It's took, like the messengers took her would be the Hebrew,
Is
the
that
usual translation.
vayikach?
Yeah, vayikacheha.
But didn't he purposely get her husband killed?
Later, that's
Mhm.
coming.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, we're not there.
Find out
He's
later.
going to do some really horrible stuff in
Yeah,
the next
He
few
does. I
minutes.
remember we studied this in Rabbi Glick's class last year.
Yes, that is the challenge of this style of text study, is to like it's like studying history. It's what people in history don't know what we know about what comes afterwards.
Right.
Why is it specified that Uriah was a Hittite and nothing specified about Eliam?
Hmm. I would guess that it's because Eliam was an Israelite, so they didn't feel that they needed to specify.
So does that bear any significance?
Hmm.
Were the Hittites warriors in those days?
Yes, they had an empire in Anatolia, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
But I also heard an opinion that it's because Uriah was a convert, who happened to be from like the Hittite successor states in like the North Syria area. I heard one opinion that was along those lines. So it could be just because he was a convert who was from a Hittite background, and it just stuck as something that people addressed him by. Maybe.
Yep, that's certainly a midrash about it. The text does not tell us one or the other.
Well, would there even been a marriage if there wasn't a conversion? Or were people intermarrying and it wasn't such there wasn't that much of an impediment as far as being able to continue to participate in congregational or religious activities?
Well, Jacob married women who were not Israelites.
Yeah, Jacob did, Moses did, Solomon did, Ahab did. So it seems that it was a thing that was done. It will be relevant later. Well, I was going to say it'll be relevant later if her father, if she is Jewish, through her parents, but that's actually putting in matrilineal descent, which is a later thing. because in the time of the Bible, it's patrilineal descent that you're Jewish if your father is. So yeah,
David,
I'm not
you
sure
asked.
yeah, go ahead, Alan.
No, you put the question about how did Batsheva feel at various points in the story, and somehow we've all chosen, but we haven't gotten around to talk about how she may have felt when she found out or when she realized she was pregnant. Was she horrified? Was she confused because it could be her husband or it could be David, who was the father? Was she thinking, oh, I may be the mother of a child of the king? Or horrified that she was the mother of a child of someone not her husband? I would imagine she could have been pretty kind of distraught by the position she was now in.
I think the story as it continues shortly was that her husband, Hiram, her husband was Uriah was away fighting battles for quite a while. And if they just continued with till the child was born, he could not have possibly been the father of it. She could not conceive it from him.
Also, I find it very interesting that it says she had just purified herself after her period. Where does that fit in terms of timeline of women knowing they had to do that? I mean, if she was Jewish, was she that well educated she knew that she had to do that? It's almost as if this is a prelude to having sex. She's purified herself in order that should she and David have a connection of some kind, she'd be clean and be able to have sex with him.
I see how you come to that. The rules around the biblical rules around what's called family purity, around going to the mikveh after 2 weeks after your period, I believe they are binding on women who are not yet married as well. So I don't know. So I think so it seems that she probably would have done that anyway, whether or not she was planning on having sex with anybody.
Well, think of it this way. I mean, if she purified herself, I'm understanding the way that's read, the way it reads, that she had just purified herself after her period. Now, her period, she wasn't pregnant before she had relations with David.
What was the last thing you said? There was a bit of an echo.
I said, if she would have been pregnant, she wouldn't have had a period.
Right.
And apparently she just purified herself. Why would they mention that? But it says here she just purified herself. So it was a short while ago. So there wasn't that period. And if Uriah was away with all the other troops, literally he wouldn't have had the opportunity to impregnate her prior to her being fetched. David.
All right, good point.
So
Let's go into the next.
She knows who the father is.
Yes. Yeah. Question 3. How might David have felt at various points in the story so far?
Pretty good. He always gets his way because he's a very powerful king. So what's he supposed to feel bad about?
All right.
It's like he has a real prize in this beautiful woman.
Like he's broken the 7th commandment. Shouldn't he have a little bit of guilt in there? I mean, isn't it by Jewish Old Testament law, adulterer who commits sin of sleeping with another man's wife is punishable by death for both the man and the woman? I mean, he's
I
just,
believe so, yeah.
it sounds very Trumpian to, sorry, I shouldn't get into modern political scope, but very much taking advantage of your power in an inappropriate way. But I'm sorry, that's how it sounds to me. Doesn't make me feel very sympathetic to him.
Fair enough.
He probably felt quite privileged.
So I would agree with Alan on some of this, that it feels like there was an abuse of power and that Batsheva was really at the disposal of somebody who took her. And that word is something that is a very strong word. And I also think about towards the end of David's life, where there is a discussion about the needing to keep him warm. And there is a young maiden given to him. And his response in that situation seems to be the total opposite of what we're reading here. And so to me, it makes me wonder, did he learn from during this situation? Did he learn about how impactful his actions were with Bathsheba and with Uriah during this, and he learned and he grew and he changed what we see a little bit later towards the end of his life.
So, if David came to you for advice at the end of this part, what would you suggest that he do?
Kind of hard to think about advising the king, who was king at a time of almost, he could do what he wanted on whatever his whim was. It's not like your friend coming to you, you could easily end up dead with no further repercussions for him if he didn't like what you said. So I keep my mouth shut.
All right.
He could call Uriah back from the battle to get reacquainted with his wife. And then there might be some doubt as to who the father is.
That does seem like the best way out of the situation.
Doris thinks like a king.
Good to be king, Cindy.
What about tshuva? What about honestly admitting what had happened and finding a way to try to make it right? I have no clue how that might be done.
Admitting to whom?
Well, certainly to Uriah, maybe acknowledging the child if and when it is born. Vowing to leave the woman alone. None of this, of course, is going to happen.
No, but I think that we're putting on our own current thoughts about this. I mean, if you think about the time then, he didn't have to do anything, as somebody earlier said. He was very powerful.
No, Norma, I hear you, but what has the Torah been telling us for, 5 books and then extensive additional Tanakh text, certainly there's nothing. If you asked what should be done, what should David do if he listened to the tradition, it wouldn't be the things that he does do. And of
But he
course,
does all these things,
he's going to get punished.
but nobody's going to stop him.
No, but he's going to pay a heavy price. And so will other people.
Yeah, but people are going to be paying for it, so he's punished. So
Exactly. Right.
I don't. So.
But what options might he have had that would be more consistent with what we're supposed to do?
I mean, the only person who can punish him is God. I don't think the local people are going to punish him.
Well, but to Cindy, your question of what Tanakh or what in a moral, ethical construct of our teachings, rather than the real world of a ancient king, but in the world of what our moral tradition would teach us, is, as you said, confess, probably resign his position of power because he's abused it, and offer himself up for the punishments taught by our law. I think they're too strict to say that should be punishable by death and that she should be punishable by death, but that at least to acknowledge, and yes, that's very much a 21st century concept, and some Supreme Court justices and others don't seem to think it's necessary, but not necessary. But having said it, I think our tradition would say that's the moral, ethical life.
Well, and Natan is going to scold him, right? I mean, he's going to hear the prophet. He's going to have some scolding coming.
Perhaps what he should not have done was to go with her in the first place.
Hear, hear.
Did they allow divorce?
Would not have had Solomon.
Yes.
So if Bathsheba and Uriah were divorced, then David could marry her.
That's true.
It would be kind of an honorable thing to do.
If that's what she wants.
Yeah. The women don't count in these stories.
All right, let's go on to Act 2. All right, Gabriel, would you read this text, please?
Yes. Thereupon David sent a message to Joab, "Send Uriah the Hittite to me." And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab and the troops were faring and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and bathe your feet." When Uriah left the royal palace, a present from the king followed him. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the royal palace, along with the other officers of his lord, and did not go down to his house. When David was told that Uriah had not gone down to his house, he said to Uriah, "You just came from a journey. Why didn't you go down to your house?" Uriah answered David, "The ark and Judah are located at Sukkot, and my master Joab and your majesty's men are camped in the open. How can I go home and eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As you live by your very life, I will not do this." David said to Uriah, "Stay here today also, and tomorrow I will send you off." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day. The next day, David summoned him, and he ate and drank with him until he got him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep in the same place with his lord's officers. He did not go down to his home.
Okay. Thank you. So at what points in this section could the story have been changed?
Uriah had gone home, and then he would have solved the problem. Or they would have solved. Was he encouraging him to go home and sleep with his wife? That's why I was chuckling. I was reading that. You know what he was maneuvering to do.
That's what I told him he should do.
So the king is trying to betray, he's betrayed this man, and this man continues knowingly, really, he is the better of the two men. He's loyal to his king, and he doesn't want to have special privilege compared to his comrades in arms. What a contrast. David didn't go out and be with his men at the battle.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, leadership. What kind of a leader is this? You're not out there with your troops, putties. You know what's happening, you're suffering, and you lead by example, not by cowering behind the walls and then letting your men go out to battle. Now, I haven't been in that type of an operation, but when I'm working on a job or I'm on construction or something like that, if things get rough, I have my steel-toed boots on and I'm out there with them, just like the lady's aunt. And there's an interesting, I just learned something else negative about David, aside from what I knew before.
Well, Eisenhower stayed in England when the troops invaded France.
Yes, and I would wonder if Eisenhower had a way of being in touch with his troops in a way that David did not.
Right. But there was a difference. At what levels? But we'll get off to another discussion. It has nothing to do with this.
All right. Speaking of David, how do you think David is feeling at various points in this section?
I would think he's feeling a little frustrated.
Desperate. He's going to do something very desperate now.
All right. How do you think Uriah is feeling at various points in this section?
Clueless.
What's going on?
So,
Okay. Yeah.
So we assume that Uriah has an inkling that something had gone on, and that's why he didn't go back to his home.
We only assume what the text tells us.
We have no reason to think that he knew. It's just his way is to behave with integrity with regard to what he thinks is integrity.
So it's like his boss is offering him a chance to take it an easy path, and he's saying no, because everybody else is out there. I'm not gonna. I'll stay and do it just the same as everybody else. Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
What do you think Batsheva is hoping will happen?
That her husband will feel that this is his child and she won't have to deal with the king and with the community. That's, I mean, I don't have any reason to think that she was looking to have a child of the king. Does
she even know that Uriah is back in town?
Does she know that Uriah is back in town? Play it out either way. What if she does, and what if she doesn't? What is she hoping will happen? Either at the end of this or during this section.
think if she thinks that Uriah is away in battle, then I presume that she hopes that she can give her child up, or her future child up for adoption, or send it off to one of his palace maidservants.
Mm-hmm.
Just get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Do we know if this is her first child? Is this her first pregnancy?
We don't know of others. This is the first time that she's introduced in the text. I feel like if there were other, from the perspective of a storyteller, which I also am, I feel like if there were if she had other children, that would vastly complicate the story and would need to be accounted for on the part of the biblical narrator. So
Yeah,
I
agree with you completely, David. I just didn't know, and I didn't know if that would have been, it would have always been mentioned, depending on, I guess, her status or who knows.
Yeah. No, it's a good question.
Let me ask you, David, were there with respect to halakha at the time, were there any options for her to offload the child to her siblings? Was that actually permissible? For the reasons that she's going to do it, not because of death.
Well, on the one hand, I don't know for sure. I would assume that there have been times when one set of parents can't take care of a child, and then they'd go to the nearest parents or the nearest relatives. And the Bible doesn't talk about it per se. Later rabbis talk about adoption and how, like, if you raise up your child, then it's as if it's your own. So yes, it's something that was known, although did not come up in the narratives heretofore. All right, so if David came to you for advice at this point, now that he has gotten a married woman pregnant and her husband is refusing to go home, what would you suggest that he do? Seventh commandment of do not commit adultery is still operative here.
So is thou shalt not kill.
That's true. Are you suggesting that he might think of that?
It's
nowadays women get paid off to keep quiet. I imagine money might solve some problems here too.
So send Batsheva lots of money and tell her to not mention that the child is his, and maybe if necessary intervene if she would be punished otherwise.
She would still be exposed if Uriah wasn't present. It was clearly not the father of the child. Then what?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's in a pretty terrible position.
I guess the question, did they have abortions back then? And, was there, let's say, a midwife or something that would be able to help her?
She had the child and Uriah was still alive. And people realized she had committed adultery. she was subject to being stoned to death, I guess. But what about the child? What, the child also been stoned to death at that time?
No.
We don't really know how she feels, David. It doesn't say, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So we get to
we're assuming, but we don't know.
But she has
Right.
no good options.
But we don't know how she feels.
correct.
So
So
I
we
have a question from the, say, take this not as a king, but to the Middle Ages of our people, you know, in 15th and the 16th century. If a Jew committed adultery with another man's wife and she got pregnant, what were his options? Was he allowed to offer the former husband or the husband to ask to get a gets from a divorce from the woman so he could marry her and make the child, and she no longer a bastard child, an adulterous relationship, or is that not even allowed by traditional Jewish law?
I think that would be an option. Yeah, I'm drawing on things in Deuteronomy about rape as my precedent here, and I know it's not exactly the same, but I would guess that that might be that if it were adultery, that would be potentially an option. It would certainly be an ask a rabbi question, assuming that you want to admit to your rabbi that this is something that you've done.
The point being that if he rapes an unmarried woman, he's forced to marry her and can't put her away.
Right.
Which is, no one is interested in her feelings, but that's what she wants. But she hasn't got any good options.
Yeah.
So at the very least, she gets the status of a married person.
Yeah. All right. So let's see what happens next. Morris, would you read this text, please? This section.
In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, which he sent with Uriah. He wrote in the letter as follows: place Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then fall back so that he may be killed. So when Joab was besieging the city, he stationed Uriah at the point where he knew that there were able warriors. The men of the city sallied out and attacked Joab, and some of David's officers among the troops fell. Uriah the Hittite was among those who died. Joab sent a full report of the battle to David. He instructed the messenger as follows: when you finish reporting to the king all about the battle, the king may get angry and say to you, why did you come so close to the city to attack it? Didn't you know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck down? Whoops, lost it.
Sorry, I had to move it up.
Yeah, so Avimelech, son of Yerubeshet, was it not a woman who dropped an upper millstone on him from the wall at Tevais, from which he died? Why did you come so close to the wall? Then say, your servant Uriah the Hittite was among those killed. The messenger set out. He came and told David all that Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, first the men prevailed against us and sallied out against us into the open. Then we drove them back up to the entrance to the gate. But the archers shot at your men from the wall, and some of your majesty's men fell. Your servant Uriah the Hittite also fell. Whereupon David said to the messenger, give Joab this message. Do not be distressed about the matter. The sword always takes its toll. Press your attack on the city and destroy it. Encourage him.
Moving up.
When lost it.
Sorry.
Oh, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she lamented over her husband. After the period of mourning was over, David sent and had her brought into his palace. She became his wife, and she bore him a son. But the Lord was displeased by what David has done.
Okay.
No big surprise.
Yeah. So at what points could this story have been changed?
David, can I ask a question before we talk about the answer?
Please.
Yoav sends the messenger to David. He prepares the messenger by saying, "This is what David may say to you."
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that he says David may say to you is that there is a woman who threw a stone down from the wall. And it's specifically the wall at Tevet's.
Mm-hmm.
How would David have known about the woman throwing a stone from the wall if he knew nothing about what happened in this battle until the messenger got there? I mean, was this like a trap that Yoav was in effect setting by giving the messenger this story?
Good question. I think it's because he instructed in verse 19, it says he instructed the messenger as follows: finish reporting all about the battle, which includes that we were close to the wall and some people came out and attacked us, or some people attacked us near the wall. And then the king might get angry, why were you so close to the wall? And then this is what you can say in response. And when the king says, why were you so close to the wall? He may refer to this famous story at this point, or famous biblical military history story at this point, about the woman who dropped the stone.
Oh, okay. So it's not a story specifically about this battle. It's military history that they all would have known.
Right. So the woman who dropped the stone from the wall. Yes.
All
military.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Good question.
He's trying to blame his generals for this event by saying that they got too close to the wall. It was somehow their fault that Uriah was killed. It's thoroughly reprehensible.
David will stop at nothing to get what he wants. He's really not a very kind person.
Hey, this is just a cover story.
Mm-hmm.
All right. In the interest of time, when you get this source sheet, you can consider how David's feeling at the end of this, how Batsheva's feeling at the end of this, what he should do, if anything. But let's go on to the next section. Norma, would you read this part, please?
And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said, there were two men in the same city, one rich and one poor. The rich man had very large flocks and herds, but the poor man had only one little ewe lamb that he had bought. He tended it, and it grew up together with him and his children. He used to share his morsel of bread, drink from his cup, and nestle in his bosom. It was like a daughter to him. One day a traveler came to the rich man, but he was loath to take anything from his own flocks or herds to prepare a meal for the guest who had come to him. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. As David flew into a rage against the man and said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He shall pay for the lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and showed no pity. Nathan said to David, that man is you. Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who anointed you king over Israel, and it was I who rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and possession of your master's wives, and I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that were not enough, I would give you twice as much more. Why then have you flouted the command of the Lord and done what displeases him? You have put Uriah the Hittite to the sword. You took his wife and made her your wife and had him killed by the sword of the Ammonites. Therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you spurned me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite and making her your wife. Thus said the Lord, I will make a calamity rise against you from within your own house. I will take your wives and give them to another man before your very eyes, and he shall sleep with your wives under this very sun. You acted in secret, but I will make this happen in the sight of all Israel and in broad daylight. David said to Nathan, I stand guilty before the Lord. And Nathan replied to David, the Lord has remitted your sin. You shall not die. However, since you have spurned the enemies of the Lord by this deed, even the child about to be born to you shall die.
All right.
Punishment.
End of Act 4. And let's finish this off with our last couple minutes. Morris, would you please read Act 5?
Nathan went home, and the Lord afflicted the child that Uriah's wife had born to David, and it became critically ill. David entreated God for the boy. David fasted, and he went in and spent the night lying on the ground. The senior servants of his household tried to induce him to get up from the ground, but he refused, nor would he partake of food with them. On the 7th day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell David that the child was dead, for they said, we spoke to him when the child was alive and he wouldn't listen to us. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He might do something terrible. When David saw his servants talking in whispers, David understood that the child was dead. David asked his servants, is the child dead? Yes, they replied. Thereupon David rose from the ground. He bathed and anointed himself, and he changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and prostrated himself. Then he went home and asked for food, for which they set before him, and he ate. His courtiers asked him, why have you acted in this manner? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. But now that the child is dead, you rise and take food. He replied, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows, the Lord may have pity on me and the child may live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will never come back to me. David consoled his wife Batsheva. He went to her and lay with her. She bore a son, and she named him Solomon. The Lord favored him, and he sent a message through the prophet Nathan that he was named Yedidiah at the instance of the Lord.
Thank you. And that's where the story ends.
Do you think, David, that many people who don't even bother to read any of this just think that that's like a fairy tale about David and Bathsheba?
Possibly.
Yeah,
or possibly they don't know.
Right.
I mean, it's certainly noteworthy that the Jewish people have preserved this record of our kings, and one that we generally look up to as a positive example, like David and Goliath is like a well-known story. Like it would make sense that we would want to do hero worship and like totally erase the story, but we've preserved it, which I think is indicative of something.